I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the 2022 Mazda CX-5 GTSP Turbo Petrol. Now, I'm pointing out that this is a turbo petrol because the CX-5 actually comes with 4 engines. And Tom drove one of those last week. He drove a CX-5 Touring turbo diesel. The CX-5 GTSP, on the other hand, is only available with 2, which are both petrol. It's the 2.5 litre naturally aspirated engine or the 2.5 litre turbocharged version, as per the CX-9, which is in this car here. Now, that engine was only launched at the end of 2018, even though this second generation CX-5 launched in early 2017. So it took a bit of a while to migrate there, but people actually really like this engine in this car. And I suppose the point of this test is this the best engine in a CX-5? Is it a good alternative as a performance engine to the turbo diesel, which I think it is. 18% of buyers that bought a CX-5 in Australia in 2021 have chosen the turbo petrol, even though it is only available in the GT, the GTSP and the Akera, not even the lower spec 3-grade models. So people are willing to pay for the privilege of having this engine. Now, what is involved with that engine? It's a 2.5 litre direct injection turbocharged 4-cylinder with 170 kilowatts at 5,000 RPM and 420 Newton meters at 2,000 RPM, which is 30 Newton meters less than the diesel and also really strong for a petrol engine, certainly one in the mid-size SUV class. Now, Mazda also says that that was tuned for 91 octane, so those numbers are on regular unleaded. You can put 98 octane in this car and get in excess of 180 kilowatts in the car. In the CX-9 you can get 186, and this one it's about 180 apparently, which is still pretty good. In fact, you could probably look at the GTSP and go, it's the Subaru Forester XT you have when you're no longer having an XT, because that doesn't exist anymore, at least for the time being. So there are a couple of cars in this class, including the Tiguan R-Line and including the Ford Escape of all things, and cross all petrol engine versions because they all have roughly the same amount of power out of this as their turbo petrol. Now, Mazda has quite a strong heritage now of having annual model updates. In fact, the CX-5 had 2 in fairly recent years, and so this GTSP is the model for 2021. We've driven the car before, but I'll briefly go over what it gets. It's mainly about blacking out things. It gets the same 19-inch wheels as the Akera, but in gloss black rather than their rather over-polished silver in my opinion, but please feel free to say what you think, which you like better, or the GT's 19s, which are simpler than this and I think are probably the choice. We also get black mirror caps, but really this is the CX-5 we've all seen before, but in a slightly darkened version. This color was new for 2020, it's graphite gray, and we have a turbo badge here where we didn't have one before. So even though it's tiny, it still kind of maintains that stealth about the performance in a turbo petrol CX-5. Now, as well as sharing kind of unintentional performance variant status with the turbo diesel, the turbo petrol CX-5 also shares the diesel's towing capacity, which is 2,000 kilos braked, whereas the normal 2.5 only has 1,800. So this is the one to go for if you want torque. Inside, however, the boot is exactly the same across all of them, which is respectably good for a mid-size SUV. This is 442 litres. We have a space saver spare underneath. We have this awesome luggage cover that Mazda's been doing for quite some time now that clips into the tailgate, as per the Mazda 6 wagon has for quite some time. And when you fold the back seats flat, it has 1,352 litres. The floor is actually completely flat, but it doesn't actually have the most capacity in its class. Still, it's pretty good. And it does have these cool little sort of belt buckle seat folders here. Oh, that one just did the center one there for skis. And here we go, just straight down, dead easy. And an electric tailgate in this GTSP, and the GT below it. There are a few other changes inside the GTSP compared to the GT that it's so closely related to, and the most obvious of those is the seat trim. Now, in this car we have quite nice looking trim from a distance, but up close this is Maztex, which is Mazda's fancy name for vinyl, and this is Grand Luxe synthetic suede. So neither of them are natural materials, and they don't probably breathe as well, certainly not as well as the perforated leather that is in the normal GT, which costs $500 less than this. And this trim is the same as what's in a CX-5 Touring. The GTSP also has a couple of trim changes. Mazda says sort of blackened trim, which I gather refers to this sort of fake carbon fibre stuff here, which is sort of a dark finish. It has some red stitching around the gear boot and on the steering wheel, and it also has the other equipment that it shares with the GT, like an electric sunroof, like seat heating. We have a 10-way driver's seat here with 2-position memory, 6-way electric for the passenger, and we also have a 10-speaker, 249-watt Bose stereo with a 10.25-inch screen, compared to the rather miserable and old 8-inch screen that's in the Touring and below. And I think for that one main reason is a big encouragement to step up to a GT or this GTSP. Now, this stereo here is unusual in that the normal Mazda touchscreen, because it's sometimes a touchscreen and sometimes not, this one is never a touchscreen. It is all controlled by the MZD Connect controller here, which kind of becomes easier after a while. Like, it's something we're fairly familiar with now. It's been around since 2012, 2013. So this, when it's plugged into Apple CarPlay though, is made easier because you can hit the home, the navigation, the music buttons, and it actually flicks to that screen in the Apple CarPlay. I haven't tried it with Android Auto, but in the Apple CarPlay it does that instead of flicking back to Mazda's own stuff, which I prefer not to, thank you very much. So it is wired, you do have to have the wire in it, but the sound of it is really good. It is a really good stereo. So there's another reason why to step up to this car. As for the rest of the CX-5's interior, it's familiar fare. We've been looking at it for nearly 5 years now, and it's generally really quite nice. The finish of the car is really good. I love this stitching across the dash and on the doors. There's layers in the interior here that you don't get in a lot of other Japanese competitors. They just don't have that kind of little bit of plushness. Even this little slight padded section down the side of the center console here, it's just nice. The door storage here, I can fit this 1 litre camping bottle in here pretty easy. We've got a phone tray in here, but although it is only for phones, not for charging, that's all done inside this thing here, where we have a 12-volt outlet and 2 USB ports and a little filled tray with a little felt pad in it, which is actually really nicely built. But there's also a 12-volt outlet down here, but you know, that's sort of meh, whatever. Digital climate control. Probably the biggest fault in here, I think, is the seats. They look quite nice, but they just feel a bit stingy. The cushion of them is a bit short. They don't really have that much support around the sides, and I'm sure they could be pretty reasonable on a long distance, but I just don't feel like they're welcoming you. You're just sort of sitting on top of them. The rear seat continues that seating flavour, in that you do feel like you're sitting sort of on the seat rather than sinking into it a bit. Although this second generation CX-5 did make a concerted effort to lower this seat to make you feel like you were sitting more in the car. And it's not an uncomfortable place to be, it's just not exceptional. It's more acceptable. So there's an okay amount of under thigh support. There's a lot of toe room under the front seat here, and that's as low as it'll go. I should point out that this GTSP still has this ivory coloured headlining, not the anthracite that's in the top spec Akera that costs a couple of grand more. And I just feel like having this lighter headlining really makes a difference to the airiness of this car, because the rest of the interior is really dark grey. There's not a whole lot of brightness going on in here. So this definitely makes a difference, as does the sunroof. The seat itself is really only shaped for 2 people. A fold down center armrest here with this little padded lid, which has like 2 USB ports in here, a bit of carpet. It has a little sort of slot section here for breadsticks or asparagus or a pen. We have 2 cup holders here with little rubberized bits to hold them in place. We have center air vents, of course, and 2 map pockets, but really there's not a whole lot going on in here. We can fit a camping bottle in the door, although it is at quite an angle. It's probably more for putting a smaller can or something in it. We also have an adjustable backrest, but it only goes in 2 positions. So pretty simple. This is the most upright of the 2, and I feel like you wouldn't want to be any more reclined, but you can go back 1 more to there, which makes some difference, but not a whole lot. And with headroom here, I've still got quite a reasonable amount, given that there is a sunroof. But yeah, it's sort of good, but not class leading. The official combined fuel consumption figure for the Mazda CX-5 GTSP is 8.2 litres per 100 kilometres. However, we averaged 11.4 litres per 100 kilometres with a lot of city driving, but also some country fanging and corners. It's a turbo, right? The warranty for the car is 5 years or unlimited kilometres, which also comes with 5 years roadside assistance. The servicing is every 12 months or 10,000 kilometres, so the service amount across 5 years is $1,830, but that is only across 50,000 kilometres. Over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $970 to comprehensively insure a Mazda CX-5 GTSP. However, everybody's situation is different and your premiums will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, whether you garage your car, and your driving history. Now, like every CX-5, the GTSP does have a lot of safety equipment as standard, as you would expect for the second top model. You know, its highlights being it has front and rear parking sensors, it has lane departure warning with lane keep assist, it has front and rear AEB as well, the front with nighttime pedestrian detection, stuff like that, adaptive cruise with stop and go. But the thing that I like about the Mazda safety systems is that they aren't as intrusive as they are in other brands of car. And you can turn off the lane keep assist here and it'll stay off the next time you start the car. It's lit in orange in the dash lighting there to show you that it's off, so it's not difficult to not notice, but it is noticeable that it doesn't keep coming on time and again. The other main reason why we're driving this car though is what's under the bonnet, and that is the 2.5 litre turbo petrol. Now, it's such a chubby engine without necessarily being an engine that is overtly sporty. It's not unpleasant, it's just not trying too hard. It is all about effortless, chubby, lovely torque, and it is a super easy engine to drive with. This car does not need any more than 6 ratios. That's more than enough to give the CX-5 GTSP turbo petrol and the GT and the Akera that also share the same engine ample performance. And if you want to put 98 octane in it, like I mentioned earlier, then you get a little bit more. Now, among the reasons why this is the driver's choice is that the diesel in this car, if it was a GT, weighs 1,754 kilos, and this one weighs 1,718. And while that doesn't sound like a whole lot, I can guarantee that most of it is over the front axle, and you can feel that when you drive this car quickly. Now, Mazda has been honing the CX-5 again and again for much of this generation's life. And so in 2020, we had improvements to ride quality. We also had improvements to NVH, and we had all-wheel drive assist thing that says like a hill climby car button here, but it actually works in a sporting sense too. It means that if you're going to tackle a twisty road in the CX-5 GTSP, that you can turn that on and it'll be using the rear axle more of the time. It's not just reliant on the front wheels and then detecting slip and going to the back. So it's kind of like a tarmac mode really, which is sort of a good thing for this car. This is a stealth performance car after all. In terms of the CX-5's handling, it has got better and better over time, although it's still not as good as a car. You are still in a mid-size SUV that weighs more than 1,700 kilos. So even though the G-vectoring control and the general suspension tuning of the car make it really quite precise to drive, I couldn't tell any difference between sport and normal in the transmission. So the steering has pretty much one setting, and if it's not, it's very similar between both of them. So it's actually quite precise, and that's that G-vectoring control that's sort of braking bits in the front end to put torque on the outside front wheel to help it turn in. And it does turn in well. It's tight, it rolls a little bit, but not too much. The improvements to the ride quality in the CX-5 have made it a better riding car, but it's still not a great riding car. It's just more acceptably absorbent when it needs to be, rather than being surprisingly plush. I think the thing that stands out the most though really is the engine. It's just so smooth and so easy to drive behind and has such effortless performance that the fact that it shifts up at like 5,400 revs, and even when you hold it in manual and it shifts up at almost 6 grand, which is not very much rev wise, it doesn't need to go that hard. It's just an easy, breezy effortless, chunky, chubby, likable engine. I don't know how many more adjectives you can put in a sentence, but it's all of those things. What lets the CX-5 GTSP down though is these seats. They're just not up to the standard of what they could be. And the front passenger, even though it says 6-way in the specification thing, still doesn't get under thigh tilt, which is back to what Mazda's had in 2013, 2014. I thought we'd come a little bit further than that, but it turns out that we haven't. So while this GTSP doesn't really bring anything different to the table in terms of performance other than blacking out stuff, it is still a really likable stealth performance medium SUV. And now that the Forester XT doesn't exist anymore, until it does, then it's sort of like one of the few options you have for choosing something that has a really spirited chassis with a really strong level of performance. And that's probably the thing I like about it the most, although the diesel also has that as well. So with the CX-5, you actually get two choices of performance options and not just one. So, should you buy a turbo petrol Mazda CX-5? As with any engine, it depends on your priorities. And I think the best thing about the CX-5 is that it actually has two performance options, a turbo diesel or a turbo petrol. The diesel is great for towing and for torque and for long distance efficiency, but the turbo petrol has a lighter nose, the car's more agile in corners, it's more fun to drive, and it has more of a personality that I think would suit people who really are enthusiast drivers. It's also much stronger to drive than the normal 2.5. Now, the thing is, if you want this GTSP, it doesn't offer a diesel, it only offers the two petrols, which means you'd have to go to the GT below it, and that's what I would suggest would be the better model to choose from. You'll save $500 compared to the turbo petrol in this car, but you also get proper leather seats instead of that part vinyl thing we talked about before. And I actually think the GT's wheels are a little bit classier. It's one way or another really. They're both pretty similar, but I just think that the CX-5 GT turbo petrol is the one to go for. So if you haven't subscribed to Chasing Cars, please do so below the video and hit the notification bell and leave a comment on what you think about the 2022 Mazda CX-5 GTSP or on Chasing Cars. Thanks for watching.